What's up everyone? Welcome to 31 Days of Techmas with Jay's 2 cents. I'm gonna do a video today that's a little more educational. Yeah, right, I know. Okay, I was privy to a Twitter conversation that took place recently that made me realize with the amount of people that are buying graphics cards or trying to buy graphics cards or maybe finally getting into graphics cards because of the popularity of computers today, the way this particular conversation went down made me realize I need to do a refresher course on the basics of graphics cards because there was some real bad misinformation regarding what to expect, whether or not it's power limited, whether or not you need a bigger power supply. So I figured today we'll do that. Corsair's 4000D AF delivers optimized front panel airflow and maximum cooling for your PC, and with its built-in rapid route cable management keeps your system looking tidy while also staying extremely cool. The equipped Corsair 120 Air Guide fans provide directed airflow, allowing you to fine-tune the components you want to keep cool. To see the full list of features and configurations for the Corsair 4000D and 4000D AF, click the link in the description below. So for today's video, I really just grabbed a graphics card at random, which happens to be the ROG Strix 3070. Yes, I know, us YouTubers are spoiled. Why do we get these cards? We don't deserve them. I guess you don't deserve this information either, but whatever. So let's talk about a few things. I'm gonna talk about some hardware specs and what they mean, and then we'll load it up.
It sounds like an old guy trying to get up from a couch.
It's for me getting up from a couch. I'm not old. Don't say Jay is an old guy. All right, so let's talk about some hardware specs. This is gonna apply to pretty much all graphics cards. The only thing that's gonna be a little bit different is some of the readout and understanding the way the card behaves between NVIDIA and AMD. AMD's driver also includes something very similar to like what you would see with Afterburner. NVIDIA's newer GeForce Experience also includes that. However, I don't use GeForce Experience. I don't like it, therefore I don't use it. So, but AMD's driver, no matter what, is going to include it. Man, that's such a chunky boy. It's like, this generation of graphics card was just like, go big or go home. So the main three specs that you're gonna care about when it comes to the graphics card is the amount of VRAM. So that's either gonna be the 8 gigabytes, the 11 gigabytes, or AMD 16 gigabytes, or whatever. There's another subset of that, which is the generation of memory that it is. The only thing running GDDR6X is the 3080 and the 3090. Okay, so G6X, or this GDDR6, or like 6th generation basically of DDR, is essentially what most of these graphics cards have, the 3070 also being the same. The only difference between the X and the non-X, realistically, is going to be the amount of memory bandwidth and the speed of it. For the most part, people just getting into this don't need to really concern themselves with, well, does this one have GDDR6? Does this one 6X? It really doesn't matter because the only two graphics cards, like I said, that are running 6X right now, 3080, 3090, it's just a faster amount of RAM. The other thing is gonna be the amount of CUDA cores, or stream processors, or TMUs. There's a lot of different things that you'll see them called. For the most part too, people really don't care about that. Especially with the fact that the 30 series cards now are almost running like a hyper-threading kind of a deal on the cores. So even then the core count on those cards kind of has an asterisk next to it. But at the end of the day, those specs, for the person buying a card, it really doesn't matter. The only other physical spec that you're probably gonna care about is the size of the graphics card. So hopefully you've done your due diligence in making sure that the graphics card you buy or attempt to buy isn't too big for your case. So before we fire it up, let's go ahead and talk about one more thing to physically keep in mind when it comes to your graphics card. I see a lot of people still confused about whether or not you need a PCIe Gen 4 motherboard to use a PCIe Gen 4 graphics card. 30 series graphics cards, as well as the new 6000 series graphics cards from AMD, are both listed as PCIe Gen 4. All that means is that it will allow the PCIe lanes to run at their fastest speed. However, graphics cards these days are not fast enough to max out that amount of bandwidth. So you're not gonna see a difference of running it on a Gen 3 or a Gen 4. But the confusion I see from people is whether or not you have to pair them, Gen 4 to Gen 4. The device will communicate with the motherboard and everything is fine. So it's one of those things you don't need to confuse yourself or get concerned about whether or not you have to match a graphics card brand with the graphics card manufacturer that's the same, like AMD to AMD. It really isn't gonna matter. That's changing a little bit though this time around because of stuff like Smart Access Memory, where if you pair an AMD graphics card with the latest 500 series chipset with AMD, you get Smart Access Memory where the CPU gets a little bit of a speed bump because it can access the GPU memory. We haven't done our video yet about what the improvement is of that. I can tell you it's low single-digit improvements. So I wouldn't even look at that as being a factor as to why you should buy a certain graphics card. Buy the fastest graphics card you can afford for your budget that the graphics card can provide, not the ecosystem. That's something that will mature, and we'll talk about that more in the future, especially since NVIDIA has their version coming out as well. Let's go ahead and fire it up and show you guys what software to use to monitor your graphics card, how to understand the things that you're seeing, and then hopefully get people to realize it's a lot simpler than a lot of people are making it. All right, so let's talk about the software now to kind of show all of this in practicality. We've got 3 pieces of software I like to use that's free. We've got Tech Power Up GPU-Z. This will tell you everything about your graphics card, the BIOS version, the boost clocks, all that sort of stuff. The driver date, what driver is installed. This is Heaven. I like to use Heaven because it runs full speed in the background. It will load the graphics card enough to get an idea of what's going on. But the problem is graphics cards are getting really fast now versus when this benchmark came out, and so it's hard to get 100% load out of this. But if you use it with any graphics card, most people running average mid-range graphics cards will get fully loaded by this test. And then MSI Afterburner just allows us to adjust some sliders here so we can see how they relate to the performance of the graphics card when the sensor tab of GPU-Z will tell us exactly what's happening here. Let's kind of work our way from the top to the bottom quickly here. You can see our core clock right now, it's at 1905 because the graphics card is set to performance mode, so it will keep the core clocks up. So here's our memory clock. Remember, it's this number essentially times 8 now, which is really weird. GPU temperature, fan speed, so you can see the RPM and all of that. GPU load, this is going to show you the amount of load on the graphics card. Other things that we want to point out today is board power draw. This is the entire board. That's everything that gets power from the graphics card. The lighting, the fans, the memory, the core itself, any auxiliary things plugged into it. Some graphics cards now have another RGB header so that they can all tie in with the graphics card. They have additional fan headers so you can have case fans plugged into it. Keep in mind, anything you plug into your graphics card is going to rob power available to the GPU because it's all coming from the same source. So it doesn't allow you a higher limit simply because you plug more things into it. Nope, you're literally stealing power from the core, and if you're trying to overclock and get max stability, I don't recommend plugging things into the graphics card. You can see right here the total board power though, that's currently at 50 watts because we are ramped up on our clock speed. You can see the chip power draw is responsible for more than 2/3 of that number. So you can see the core is clearly what's using the most power on the card. This particular card, and this isn't going to be the case for all graphics cards, but the Asus card does report back PCIe pin 8-pin power draw. So we can see how many watts and how many volts each 8-pin power plug is drawing. Power consumption, this is essentially just like the board power, the total board power, but it's represented in a percentage. So when it comes to power here, we'll just throw some numbers here. It's going to be different for every card. Manufacturers can raise and lower that number depending on the silicon quality, depending on the binding of that GPU, the power delivery they put on there, the cooler they put on there. So it's customizable by the manufacturer. So let's say 220 watts total power draw is 100%. Then we would be using 18% of that 100% available to us. So think of 100% as your rev limiter in your engine. You hit that number, that's a hard stop. It's not gonna go farther. It'll hold there, but it won't go farther. That's the same reason why I just said I don't recommend plugging additional lights, fans, or other things to your GPU where available, because that's all factored into that same 100% power limit. Then we can see here our GPU voltage. This is what the voltage is currently at the GPU. This would have come down if we weren't under an idle. It says it's idle right now, but we're not. We've clearly brought the core clock up, as you can see. So Jay, you've told me what that is, so what does all that mean? Let's go ahead and start with the reason a graphics card stops clocking higher. So we're gonna go ahead and put a load on using Afterburner. We've got 8x MSAA, or anti-aliasing. We've got tessellation on extreme, ultra quality. We're trying to put as much load on our graphics card as possible. So now we can see our clock automatically boosted up to 2025. But Jay, that's higher than the 1905 it shows over here. Absolutely, that is GPU boost in effect. On NVIDIA, and AMD is very similar, they have another sort of a system that works. Basically says if our power limit is not maxed out, and our temperature is not maxed out, and voltage is also one of those things, go higher. But there is a hard stop. There is a max to that. Otherwise, it would literally go until it crashes, which is kind of what some of the early 30 series adopters dealt with the early BIOS and stuff, or early drivers, where some cards were going farther than they could go. Not all GPUs are created equal. This 3070 may go higher than some, but not as high as others. That's silicon lottery. You've heard that phrase before. That basically says that core will go really high because it won the lottery, or it won't overclock at all because it lost the lottery. It's just the luck of the draw. So we pushed all the way up to 2040 now without me touching anything, because our temperature is only at 51C. The core clock won't even start dropping real dramatically until we get close to that 83 number. Spoiler alert, the Strix cooler will never let it get higher than about 60. And our power limit is also still stuck at 100% because we didn't touch anything. So it auto boosted 105 megahertz, or now 120 megahertz above this number because of GPU boost. So I've seen some people ask me, why is my card overclocking? Is it gonna void the warranty? Is it gonna break? Well, I would normally say no, but we saw with the 30 series cards, some were crashing, but they fixed it through a driver to keep the GPU boost from being so aggressive. But this is good. This is you getting more for your money because it recognized it had more available to it. And this is auto overclocking essentially. So that's why it's important to point out when we do these reviews, like we kind of keep an eye on what the core clocks do, because we want to make sure that we're not giving an unfair advantage to any card by allowing it to boost higher. That's also why we do a heat soak. Get the card nice and hot, then do these things. That way the cooler temperatures don't affect it. Just a running temperature, then we run our tests. A little bit of a behind the scenes there. Let's look at what the sensors are saying though. But let's look at our GPU load. Our GPU load is at 97%. I've seen some people go, Jay, why doesn't my GPU ever go to 100%? Well, realistically, you're never gonna see it really hit 100 and stay there. It's always gonna stay a little bit below that. I'm not sure what the reason is, but that's just the way it is. 98, 99 is great. 95 and up is pretty normal. Total board power is currently drawing 232 watts. So that tells us that our board total power is probably somewhere around 220 to 230 watts. It's constantly gonna fluctuate. I've seen people ask me why this number is moving around. Is something wrong? No, the scene is changing. As the scene changes, so does the load, so does the math, so does the watts being drawn. This number is usually directly related to the GPU though. So as you see the GPU come up above 97, we might see that number come up. Let's see if it does it. So it hit 95 and it went down to 205. 97, it's back up to 220. See in between the scene how it drops because there was no load. So that number is usually gonna be directly related to this number right here. Let's talk about power draw on our plugs though. About 100 watts is coming from 8-pin 1, and about 90 watts is coming from 8-pin 2. That's more than 150 watts. That is the spec for one of the PCIe power plugs. That is why we don't recommend using daisy chains. Have a dedicated cable where possible. It will probably still work. In fact, I think we need to revisit this topic because I've done it in the past with older cards that didn't draw as much power as newer cards are drawing. It ran, didn't overclock as far for obvious reasons, but it's something worth talking about. But you can see you can easily pull more than the spec. Power consumption here. So under load, you can see we're pulling about 82% of that 100% available to us. Now this is telling us right here, perf cap reason. There was a discussion that I was tagged in on Twitter that someone was using GPU-Z and they saw the perf cap reason say PWR, which stands for power. And their understanding of that was, I think I need a new power supply. It says I'm power limited. I thought a 950 watt power supply would be enough. And that's literally the conversation that triggered this video. Because I went, okay, with the amount of people buying new graphics cards, I want them to understand these things when they see them and not freak out and start unnecessarily spending money on parts that will have zero effect on what it is that they're seeing here. PWR, or power limit, simply states that the power supply built into the graphics card, AKA the voltage delivery system, has been essentially maxed out. So what we're seeing here right now is the reason that we're limited. So V stands for core or voltage, REL stands for reliability. Over here now for a second, we saw voltage operation. So that's telling us two things. We have reached our max reliable voltage, and we've also reached our max available voltage to the core. Voltage is our limit. Power limit simply states that that total board power that I explained, fans, lights, core, memory, things plugged into it, has been reached. The maximum of that's been reached. Now you can adjust that here in Afterburner. That's one of the reasons why I like Afterburner, is this is the 100% right here. So if we go, okay, let's allow more power to it. Let's allow 25% more power. That's what the 125 is. And we hit apply. Yes, nothing happened. Literally nothing happened because the reason we're limited is not power, it's voltage reliability. That means we have reached the maximum amount of voltage the core is allowed to draw. Remember that thing I said earlier? Components will draw power, not receive power. They're not like being pushed power by the power supply. Now, I mean, there are devices you can push power to things. We don't recommend them around here. Anyway, if we were power limited, we would see PWR. So let's go ahead and artificially limit our power here. So power limit on MSI Afterburner, we can drag this down. We're currently at about 80%, right? So let's go below that number and see what happens. Let's go to 70. Watch the core. Watch right here. See, we just lost core clock. More importantly, there's a new reason we're limited here, power. So that's what caused some people to be confused, thinking the amount of power the graphics card needed from the power supply was limited, thinking that the power supply wasn't giving enough. And that's not what happened here. The amount of power the graphics card is allowed to pull was exceeded or reached. That's what is actually happening when you see power as the limit there. And because of it, you can see we dropped our core clock about 100 megahertz. Our temperature came down too, because power does equal heat. But if we go ahead and push that down even farther, let's just go 35% power is all it's allowed to draw. Look at that. Look how far it fell. 100 watts total board power. Only 66 watts is going to the GPU. So the only way it could reduce the amount of power that it was pulling was to reduce the voltage. And by reducing the voltage, because there's a table that says at these volts you're available to run this much frequency, it all comes down as a system, reducing the total board power. So if we just put this back to default by hitting the little refresh button, look at that. Everything went back up, 2010 megahertz. Our temperature will start climbing with it, and we're back to voltage reliability. And don't think of voltage reliability as saying, uh-oh, your voltage is unreliable. No, it's just saying it is within the reliable range of which it's allowed to pull voltage, and it's not going farther, otherwise it would become unreliable. Now let's talk about Afterburner, because you can see we changed what happens here with Afterburner. This is our knobs and our dials. This is just sensor reading. I've had some questions, people going, is it safe to overclock with Afterburner? Will I break my GPU? The first thing I'll tell you is you cannot physically damage your GPU by moving any of these sliders. What damages GPUs is voltage, and you have no control over that on this card. Pretty much all cards on the market, with the exception of something like the Kingpin card or any LN2 specifically designed graphics card for like world record attempts, has locked voltages. And even the Kingpin card requires a new BIOS and a controller through the manufacturer to unlock those things. You have to basically request it. So you cannot really, I'm gonna just go out on a limb and say you can't break your graphics card by using MSI Afterburner, because these limits are in place by the BIOS. The BIOS determines how far you can go with this stuff, not MSI Afterburner. So if you're gonna do something like overclocking, I would always recommend maximizing the power limit for the reasons we already showed, and temp limit, because temperature is a reason why it can also reduce clocks. We talked about the trifecta, right? Power, voltage, and temperature as GPU boost. This will allow us now to start playing with our clocks. And I already know where this card will essentially go. Let's go 2.5. 125 on the core. You can see it's now at 2145. That is a really good overclock out of the box for a 3070. I'm telling you right now, the Strix card, Asus did not pay me to use this card, didn't even ask me. But you know what, if you want to pay me for saying that, go ahead. I endorse this card if you can get your hands on it, because holy cow, is it cool, 56C, 2145 out of the box with no voltage control. And over 2000 on its own, as you saw. Okay, Jay, that's fine and all, but I'm still worried about breaking something. Let's go ahead and show you what happens if you push it too far. This button right here is the only one that could cause you some problems, startup. That basically says if that's clicked, when Windows boots, apply this overclock whether MSI Afterburner is open or not. It basically essentially writes it to the card, if you will. It's not really writing it to the card, but it will automatically apply the overclock when Windows is started. If you push the overclock too far, and allow me to show you right now what happens, plus 1000, that's gonna be a pretty hardcore crash, right? Watch this. Uh-oh. And that's where people freak out. They go, what just happened? So right now, because I did not have that checked, the system fully restarted. That is a hardcore crash, okay? It basically went, the core freaked out so bad, the only thing the motherboard knew to do to try and fix this situation in the OS was trigger a restart. So the OS went, this is irrecoverable, let's just restart the system. And as you can see, we're back. We'll open up MSI Afterburner. So, and you can see our numbers are back to stock. But let me show you what happens here. If let's just move the power sliders and let's go 100 on the core, enable startup. What can happen here is if I had that restart button selected, which says apply that number at restart, you'd get the BIOS screen like you see right here. And you'd get to the desktop, and as soon as the desktop loads, you get the same reaction you just got. Shut off, restart, and or just black screen or crash and nothing happens. And that's where people think they broke their graphics card. Now what happened is they broke the setting. And so what they have to do then is load their system into safe mode, uninstall Afterburner, go back to the normal mode, and you'll fix it. It's kind of annoying, but it's the only way to fix it. So as you can see now, if I come back to Afterburner, you can see those are still applied, right? Plus 100, and there's our core. Even though I have no profile saved, and Afterburner did not start on its own because I have it disabled, essentially it applied these numbers at the start. So there you go. Hopefully I didn't confuse you too much, but hopefully I also shed some light on how some of this stuff works as a system, because that's what you have to understand is how all of this works as a system. At the end of the day, it's really hard to break a graphics card. If I haven't broken my Kingpin card now with as much water as I have soaked it with condensation and freezing the PCIe slot solid with ice, you're not gonna break your graphics card with Afterburner. But it's important to understand the settings and what they do. If you guys enjoy this kind of video and you have a topic you think we should cover in this same beginner's guide too, let me know what you think we should cover down in the comments below. Don't forget to get your very own Jay's 2 Cents merch. This stuff is seasonal. It is gonna be going away and you won't be able to get this design again, and we'll come out with new stuff in the future. So if you like what you see, head to the description below. You guys will find a link to download it. Yeah, download our merch.
You wouldn't download a shirt.
Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.